Hi, this is Denise Donaldson, owner of Safe Ride News Publications. Thanks for watching this webinar to learn the basics of the LATCH Manual. I've made many other presentations about LATCH that refer to the LATCH Manual, but this is the first that provides a simple overview of all the basic components. Whenever I do a presentation on this topic, I always like to start by stressing that the LATCH Manual is a great resource, one that I think is essential, but it's only one of many resources that should be consulted. Chief among those, of course, are the instructions for both the car seat and the car, as well as the car seat labels. And both manufacturers are likely to have further information on their websites, including FAQs and videos. The LATCH Manual fits in among these resources because it can provide additional information from the manufacturers themselves, as I'll discuss in this webinar. The manual shown here is gray because the cover color changes every 2 years when a new edition comes out. And while this webinar is using the 2019 Lavender book as an example, the basics covered in this webinar will be useful to know for any manual going forward. It's important to consult the LATCH Manual anytime a car seat with latch is being used, but today, in the spring of 2020, its usefulness may be even more appreciated as we're trying to assist caregivers remotely. But I know that this is a hefty book, and many are out there who haven't even cracked it because they maybe don't know even where to start with it, and that's really understandable. So this 101 kind of presentation is meant to help give you a foundation for how to use the manual in any situation. Plus, I'm planning a 201 session to highlight more detailed elements of the manual that are especially helpful when helping caregivers by phone or in a virtual checkup. So I hope you'll check that webinar out as well when it's available. Okay, so back when LATCH was first being developed, way back in the 90s, the founder of Safe Ride News, Deborah Stewart, had a brainstorm. She was dedicated to helping families understand the value of tethering car seats, and so she was happy that all forward-facing car seat models would soon have tethers. But there was a problem, because only the very newest cars back then would have tether anchors. But there was also an opportunity because most cars on the road at that time could be retrofitted with tether anchors to upgrade them to allow tethering. So she set about to make resources that advocates could use to identify the tether anchor parts and educate caregivers about how to get them installed. And that was in 1999, and so the first edition was actually specifically about tethering. And then 2 years later, when LATCH was available in the newest of cars, the manual expanded to also include information about latch positions. And then more time passed, and it became apparent that even more information would be useful to technicians. So chapters describing usage were added, as well as installation tips and quick reference tables. And eventually the topic of latch weight limits also emerged and became an important topic. Ultimately, we've come to realize that what we put in the LATCH Manual overall serves many purposes, including complementing, clarifying, or even correcting owner's manuals. It also uses uniform terminology. It's written in tech speak, if you will, and it consistently answers yes or no to many of the common questions that might not be mentioned in a manual if the answer is no. So it has a place where you can always find that answer. I want to start off giving you this background, not so much just so you'll know the history, but to give an overview of the contents of the manual. And I like this graphic form because it accurately shows not only growth with the larger and larger circles as time went on, but also that the core elements are still a part of the manual. And while elements are added as we go through time and they're refined, each edition retains that basic information from the last manual as we go along. But that doesn't mean that older editions should continue to be used, because with each update cycle, every topic is reviewed. And while new information is added, many of the past information is also reviewed and then revised and even sometimes corrected. So on a 2-year cycle, Safe Ride News, as the editor, we collect this information from the car seat manufacturers and vehicle manufacturers. We do this through direct contact with those vehicle manufacturer reps so that we can ensure that the information provided is current and up to date. So in other words, it's not pulled from any website or even from looking in manuals, but it comes straight from the manufacturers for the information as of the publication date of the Latch Manual. Safe Ride News is going to then suggest edits, but the manufacturers all sign off on the final copy. And some suggested edits come from input from CPSTs in the field. So, and that's based on your findings out there, what you find would be helpful or more clear to be in the manual. So in that way, I like to stress that the Latch Manual is something we can all use and participate in. So we really appreciate that from the field. The input from all these sources goes into the 4 basic sections of the Latch Manual. The book starts out with 8 chapters that are written by Safe Ride News with some input from manufacturers, followed by Appendix A, information provided by the car seat manufacturers, and Appendix B, information from the vehicle manufacturers, and then Appendix C, in which Safe Ride News develops an information that pulls from both Appendix A and B. So we're going to look at each of these 4 sections today. So I like to think of the Latch Manual chapters as being kind of like the textbook on Latch. And you can see that there are 8 chapters, and they're described here and what they are. A tip for finding these chapters easily is to fan the pages out to see the 8 chapter tabs as shown here. Now, I just said that the chapters are like a textbook, and I know that might not make them sound super appealing, but I do encourage you to check them out. The first 5 chapters could be considered like a basic introduction to Latch and how to use the parts of Latch. So this is definitely a good place for any technician who's still beginning on the learning curve on how to use Latch. But you know what? I would even encourage veteran technicians to reread these chapters and check them out because they do provide many helpful usage tips. And while I hope you'll read the whole thing, there are a couple topics in these chapters I want to single out. One is the weight limit information on page 22 of chapter 3. This is a single page summary that covers why there are weight limits for using lower anchor attachments to install a car seat, as well as the details of how to follow that guidance depending on when the car seat was made. I like to note this page in particular because it's a succinct tutorial on a topic that I know has been rather confusing for people over time. Another section that may be of particular interest is on pages 46 and 47 of chapter 5. This section describes how to tether in pickup trucks. And as CPSTs know, tethering in trucks can be particularly tricky, so these pages can be helpful as a complement to the owner's manual instructions and even to the model-specific information that the Latch Manual provides for each vehicle in Appendix B. I also want to highlight particular chapters 6 and 7 specifically, because these chapters include manufacturer-provided details for actual usage about specific car seat models and vehicle models. So chapter 6, as shown here, covers retrofitting tether anchors, starting with a short introduction to that topic, followed by what we call a supplement that gives the vehicle brand and sometimes model-specific information about older cars and adding tether anchors to them. So this is where most of that original information from the very first Latch manuals now resides. In addition to the brand information, some brands that have free installation programs have provided their specific service bulletin information, and that's shown on the sheet that's on the right-hand side, is one example. Now, as the years have gone by, you probably noticed it's become a lot harder to get tether anchors retrofitted, partially because some of the parts have actually run out, but also because the concept is less well known. So we try to get information into the Latch Manual as to parts that are no longer available, but just having any of this information like the service bulletin number, it's all very helpful for any caregiver who's seeking to upgrade an older vehicle to allow tethering, because we all know that that's going to make it so much safer for a child to ride in that older car. Now, chapter 7, that's all about tethering car seats that are rear facing when doing that is allowed by the manufacturer of the car seat. And because this is not a very common type of instruction for most car seats, this chapter can be really a helpful introduction for learning more about that topic. It also includes many usage details from the specific manufacturers that allow rear-facing tethering, with some or all of their products. So it goes into a little more detail sometimes, or frequently actually, than maybe what is found in some of the owner's manuals. As shown on the page at right, there's also a table at the end of the chapter that summarizes models that allow rear-facing tethering. Sounds like we're going to have to update that coming up in the future, but for now, this is all the models. So let's move on now to the appendices, which are shown here. Just like with the chapters, a tip for finding these quickly is to fan the book out, and now look for the long gray edges that run up and down the page. You'll find 3 of them, although you can see that that third one is way at the back of the book. So let's start with Appendix A, which covers information about car seats from the car seat manufacturers. While this information should not take the place of referring to the owner's manuals, it can definitely complement it. There are many ways in which it does this, including adding to and clarifying information, as well as sometimes providing additional supporting information, such as images. While most car seat manuals today are pretty thorough, there are some examples in Appendix A of information you won't find in the owner's manual. Also, in many cases, the information provided can be a cross-reference to matching information from the vehicle manufacturer in Appendix B. So we'll talk a little bit later about how to cross-reference some information, and that's going to be found in the 2 appendices. So Appendix A includes all car seat manufacturers on the market that have unexpired models of car seats that use latch. So that's not all the manufacturers, but it is nearly all of them, with just a few exceptions, such as ones that make only booster seats that don't have latch. Each of these manufacturers is going to have what we call an entry, and so we'll go through what a typical entry for a manufacturer contains. But first, before the very first entry, there is this page that provides an introduction to all the entries. And I don't think many people actually look at this, but this page is going to be helpful because it's going to tell you how the material was gathered, what types of entries what types of points each of the entries includes. Some of the acronyms that are used are going to be defined here. And also it's going to list the normal usage points that aren't specifically stated in the entries because they're kind of a given for any manufacturer in any situation. All right, so each of the entries, and this is just, the combi example, but each entry starts with a section of bulleted latch details for the manufacturer's car seat models. The first ones of those, as highlighted here, are going to cover the details that apply to all car seats among all the car seats in their line. So these are the first bulleted details. And then those are going to be followed by bullets that are specific to certain model types. And I could go into a ton of detail about these very useful bullets, and I probably will for a future webinar. However, for now, I'll just point out one example. Here it's underlined in red, which is instructions for changing latch between rear-facing and forward-facing. I think many people aren't really aware that this helpful detail is available here for any of the manufacturers that have car seats that are convertible. So this, you can kind of read through and see there are a lot of other types of details, but they're going to be organized by the type of car seat model. After all the model bullets are done, there are additional sections that are also super useful. Just one of those is highlighted here, showing where you can find information about recalls on car seats. And I'm only going to list in here the ones that are not expired. So there have been many recalls over time, but I've taken out the ones on car seats that are expired. But any that aren't expired for a given latch manual are going to be listed here. And there are other of those types of sections too that are useful. So besides the latch related recalls, there are many others, including guidance on reducing the risk of entanglement from the car seat manufacturer. There's going to be sections if there is latch use that's different when the car seat is used in Canada, or if it's used on a school bus, that will be listed there. There's also going to be a listing of the inflatable seatbelt policy for that manufacturer, specific to Ford, Lincoln type inflatable seatbelt. And then there's also going to be, if the manufacturer has provided a QR code that people can read using an app on a smartphone to go straight to their owner's manuals or usage video, I include that QR code there. And so over time, I hope there are more and more of those because I find that to be super handy, but some of them do include it in the LATCH manual. And then finally about Appendix A, there are a couple of quick reference tables that I'd like to point out at the beginning of the appendix. One covers all car seats that have at least some usage with a tethering requirement, and then the other covers instructions regarding the use of latch with booster seats. And each of these tables simply summarizes details that were pulled from the entries that are in the actual Appendix A entries for each manufacturer. But these are interesting. If you read them through, I think you'll find, you can definitely find all this information in the specific listing, in the specific entry, but looking at the table can also be another way to think about and consider each of these topics, which are also interesting. Let's move on to Appendix B. And again, we can ask, well, why is that so useful? And it really is useful in a number of ways. It's a backup to the owner's manual, and it's often uses more standardized language. It adds clarification, and sometimes even makes corrections or updates to what's in a printed owner's manual. Even more often than in Appendix A, Appendix B actually includes information that doesn't appear in any owner's manual. And Appendix B also alerts people to latch-related recalls for vehicles. It also includes those details that we're going to want to cross-reference to car seat information in Appendix A as well. So starting off with thinking about the various entries, we're going to have 52 vehicle brands, and each one has its own entry. And while a few vehicle brands have entered the market since the latch era began, actually several have left the market, but Appendix B includes all of them. It should be really noted that in general with the latch manual, we try to keep as much information in there. And certainly when it comes to cars, while we do add new vehicles, we don't ever remove old vehicles. And, you know, because unlike car seats, cars don't expire. So we keep that information in there. We don't remove it. So that's one of the reasons you can feel confident continuing to use the most current one, because it's going to have everything you need, and it's going to be the right and accurate information as of the date of publication. So this is a really important part to note about each of the brand entries. They start with a set of bullets, and a description for how to use the bullets is actually underlined in red here. So each of the entries has this little description if you need a reminder. But what these bullets are, they're very important because they are going to tell you information that applies to all the vehicles of the brand. So this bullet information should be essentially added. All of this information should be added to any model-specific information that gets looked up. So this is where you're going to find things such as the latch weight limits, center use borrowing policies, and general information about adjusting head restraints. In fact, this information is so robust and important that I've done a whole webinar just covering these bullets, and that can be found posted at the CPS board website. If you go there and view it, as well as pass a quiz, you can actually earn 1 CEU, so I'd certainly encourage that. I also want to point out that each entry has a key to the acronyms that are used. So this slide looks a little bit like a hot mess, but I just wanted to point out that, make it clear that where you can find the definitions of some of these terms. Because when you go down the table, you see all these kind of terms that like, well, what does each of these mean? And so you want to go back up to the key and see, so you're understanding what you're reading. So as you can see, many of the acronyms are used in the table to describe what latch parts are available in each of the seating positions, or if none is there or there's no seating position there, etc. But other acronyms might be used in the notes section or even in the bullets. After the bullets and the key is each entry's model-specific tables. And I say tables plural because if the manufacturer has both 2- and 3-row vehicles, there's going to be 2 separate tables for each of those types. So if you don't find a model you're looking for in the table you're looking at, consider whether you're looking at the appropriate one of these 2 tables. This just shows an example of a 2-row table, so you can see that it will tell you what you can expect in terms of how each model is equipped with latch. But also be sure to read the notes section because that's where a lot of the goodies are. That's where it's going to give you a lot of additional information that's specific to the model. Appendix B also has some quick reference tables. This 2-page table shown here provides the lower anchor and tether anchor weight limit for each vehicle brand. And then there's, on the next pages, there's actually 2 other tables that break out the model-specific tether anchor limits for Fiat Chrysler vehicles, because they're the only one that has model-specific answers. And so those are going to include, besides Chrysler and Fiat, also Jeep, Dodge, and Ram. So now that we've covered Appendix A and B, I'd just like to reiterate that many topics in these appendices interrelate with one another. So here's an example of that with using weight limit information. You can find the vehicle manufacturer information in the bullet section of Appendix B, but that should also be compared to the information from the car seat manufacturer in Appendix A. In Appendix A, you'll find more specifics that will be dependent upon when the car seat was actually made, whether there's information on the label or not. And then it's also going to have the weight of the car seat. So in case your information leads you to having to subtract the weight of the car seat from 65 pounds to get the actual child weight limit, that weight of the car seat is going to be provided at the end of the entry for the car seat in Appendix A. So in this case, if you're looking at the right-hand side, it's actually showing one of these is an example from Evenflow, the other one's an example from Graco. So, you know, obviously you'd want to match the right ones up, but I showed this with Graco because even though that's a huge list of car seats, this isn't all of Graco's car seats. I don't give the weight for every Graco car seat. I just give the weight for the ones that might have a weight limit. So that's going to be your convertible car seats, your combinations, and your all-in-one type models. So those are what you're going to find there. There are several other points in these 2 appendices that are interrelated and should be compared for cross-reference with one another. These include booster use with latch, whether the tether strap must or may twist to be connected to the tether anchor, whether a seat belt may be used as a tethering anchor, and guidance for reducing entanglement risk. Now, some of these may be topics that you'll want to learn more about to even understand, and you can learn more at the page noted there. You can in the Latch Manual chapters, and as well as in that webinar on Latch that I mentioned earlier that's posted at the CPS board website. These will be described in detail there. So finally, let's talk a little bit about Appendix C. This appendix is a short review of latch in center seating positions. To create this appendix, I gather the relevant information from Appendix A and B, and then in general, it provides a tutorial on the topic of latch in the center position and gives specifics about use in situations that are either standard or non-standard width positions. So let's go through each of those. The first page is like a mini tutorial on center use, and I like to point this out because this topic can be a little bit confusing, especially for someone who's a new technician. So I think it can be really helpful when trying to come up with the words to explain this concept. For instance, if you're educating remotely, such as by phone or teleconferencing, you might want to just recheck this even if you're not a new technician, just to see if there are wordings here that might help you with getting points across for handling things remotely. Now, Table C1 is all about center use in non-standard situations. As I mentioned before, many topics must be cross-referenced between the car seat and the vehicle manufacturer's policy. So I created this table to provide assistance in doing that. So it's actually going to cross-reference right here on the table rather than having to go look up in both places, which you can still do if you want within Appendix A or B. But this just provides another way to look this up. And just to make sure we're clear, what we're talking about is that situation in which there are standard latch sets provided in the outboard positions of the car, but say someone wants to install using latch in the center by borrowing the inner bars of each of the outboard sets. As shown in this image here, That would entail an installation that has bars set wider than the 11 inches apart. And because regulations require strength testing by pulling straight outward, as it would expect when the bars are set standard, both the car seat and the car manufacturer must approve this, as it would mean forces being placed more at an angle rather than straight outward. So you can kind of see there in the center, they would be pulling more to the sides. So each of the manufacturers is going to need to test that and say whether they approve it or not. So going back to table C2, it's going to list all the vehicle models and model years for which the manufacturer of the car has said it's okay to do this along the left-hand side. And then along the top, it lists the car seat manufacturers that also allow it, and they're grouped by how many maximum inches apart they'll allow the LA bars to be set apart. If either a car seat or a car is not listed on this table, it simply means that installation using this borrowing method isn't allowed. And please note that there in the red box at the bottom, for the car seat manufacturers that do allow it that are listed at the top, you can see there are footnotes, and the footnotes correspond to these conditional characteristics that you would need to make sure are in place before you could say, yes, it's allowed. There's also a table C2 in Appendix C, which is a 2-page table as well that lists all car models that have standard latch in a center position. Each one of these is grouped by the type of arrangement it is, such as whether it stands alone, overlaps, or shares a bar, for instance. So this isn't a cross-reference table because, of course, with the car seat manufacturer, if it's a standard latch position, it's a given that it's acceptable. But what you want to know is this actually a standard latch position? This pulls the information from Appendix B entries and brings them all together in a 2-page spread. Okay, so that covers all the sections of the Latch Manual. I sure hope you're going to find that this information is helpful in making it much easier for you to utilize your manual to its full potential. Please note that any updates between our printed editions are going to be posted at the Safe Ride News website as well, so please check that out. And while this information is fresh, it would be a great time for you to take the Latch Manual quiz, and that's available at Safe Ride News website too. By scoring a 16 or more out of 20 on the quiz, you'll earn 1 CEU. However, even if you don't need a CEU, the quiz has been made to help reinforce what you've learned in this webinar, as well as help you learn even more than what was presented here. Please stay tuned for future webinars, and thank you so much for all you do to help families keep children safe. You can reach us at info@saferidenews.com if you have any questions or comments on the Latch Manual, and we always enjoy hearing from technicians. Thank you.